The rain hammered the glass roof of the all-night diner like it wanted to punish the world. At 3:17 a.m., the richest man alive sat alone in a cracked red vinyl booth, sleeves rolled high, staring at the faded black ink compass on his left forearm as if it might still point him home. A tired waitress in a faded blue dress set down his coffee, glanced at the tattoo, and whispered the 7 words that would ruin both their lives in the most beautiful way. "Sir, my mother has a tattoo just like yours." If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and lemon bleach. Outside, Manhattan's sleepless lights bled across the wet pavement, turning every puddle into a broken mirror. Inside, only 3 souls remained: the short-order cook humming old salsa under his breath, the waitress who hadn't sat down in 9 hours, and the man everyone on the Forbes list knew as Alexander Quinn, 38, net worth uncountable, heart officially missing since 2009. Alexander's driver had begged to wait in the rolls, but he'd sent the car away. He wanted the discomfort of a place that didn't know how to pronounce his name. He wore a $2,000 coat over a $20 conscience and nursed a cup of coffee that cost $2.75 and tasted like regret. Across the counter, Lila Morales moved like someone perpetually bracing for bad news. 29, ponytail fraying, name tag crooked, eyes the color of strong tea left too long in the sun. She had worked the graveyard shift at the Starlight Diner for 6 years because the rent on a 1-bedroom in Washington Heights didn't care that she once dreamed of painting murals on subway walls. She refilled salts, wiped circles that would reappear by dawn, and told herself every night that tomorrow she would start living again. She noticed the man the moment he walked in: no entourage, no phone glued to his ear, just a tall stranger with rain in his hair and sorrow in his shoulders. He chose the worst booth, the one with the tear nobody had bothered to patch, and rolled up his sleeves as though the diner's stale air might disinfect something inside him. That was when she saw the tattoo. A simple nautical compass, old school, hand-poked, the end slightly crooked like the artist had been drunk or crying or both. North was filled in solid black, the other directions hollow. Around the rim, tiny script so faded it was almost invisible unless you knew to look. "Come back to me." Lila froze with the coffee pot trembling in her hand. She had seen that exact tattoo every night of her childhood, traced it with crayon when she was 5, asked her mother why North was filled in, and her mother had only answered, "Because that's the way he left, Mija. That's the way he'll have to return." Her mother, Camila Morales, had died 8 months ago after a stroke that stole her words first and her heartbeat second. The funeral had been small, the casket closed, the apartment already half-packed by a landlord who measured grief in calendar days. All Lila had left of her were 3 things: a tin box of photographs, a rosary with one missing bead, and the memory of that compass tattoo on her mother's wrist that she used to kiss goodnight. Lila set the coffee pot down harder than she meant to. The clatter made Alexander look up. Their eyes locked. She saw storm-gray eyes bloodshot from something stronger than exhaustion. He saw a woman whose hands shook the way his used to when the private investigators came back empty-handed again. He started to speak, probably the polite thank you rich men give when they want to be left alone, but the words caught when he noticed her staring at his forearm. Instinctively he began to pull the sleeve down. Too late. Lila's voice came out cracked and small, the way it did when she used to call in sick to work because crying took too much energy. "Sir, my mother has a tattoo just like yours." Alexander's hand froze mid-motion. The diner's tired fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a warning. The cook stopped humming. Even the rain seemed to pause against the windows. He looked at her, really looked, and something ancient and terrified flickered across his face. "What did you say?" His voice was rough, deeper than the ocean he'd once disappeared into. Lila swallowed. The words felt too big for her mouth, too dangerous for this hour of the morning. "My mother," she repeated, barely louder than the rain. She had the exact same compass. Same crooked end. Same words around the edge. "I used to trace it when I was little." Alexander's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the table, black liquid spreading like spilled ink across the formica. For one endless second, the richest man in the world looked like a boy who'd just been told the ship he'd been watching for 24 years might finally be coming home. Somewhere in the kitchen, the radio crackled with static and a love song neither of them would ever forget. Alexander couldn't breathe. The coffee seeped into the cuffs of his $3,000 shirt and he didn't feel it. All he felt was the sudden violent tilt of the earth under the cracked vinyl booth. 24 years of private investigators, satellite photos, sleepless nights in cities whose names he couldn't pronounce anymore, and the answer had been hiding behind a counter in a diner that smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. Lila stood rooted, both hands now gripping the edge of the table as if the floor might drop away. The cook, Raoul according to his name tag, peeked through the pass-through, sensed the electricity and wisely disappeared again. Alexander found his voice first, but it sounded like someone else's. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Lila's fingers fumbled with the little brass button on her sleeve. She never wore short sleeves at work. The uniform was long and ugly, but tonight she had rolled them once because the dishwasher had broken and the kitchen felt like hell. She pushed the fabric higher, revealing the inside of her own left forearm. Nothing there. She turned her wrist over, frantic now, and there it was, on the soft underside, almost hidden unless you knew exactly where to look. A tiny black anchor no bigger than a dime. Her mother had made her get it the week she turned 18. "Because you are what keeps me from drifting," Camila had said, kissing the fresh ink while Lila cried from the sting and from something deeper. Alexander stared at the anchor like it was the only real thing left in the world. Then he did something no one in that diner would have believed if they'd filmed it. He reached across the table, slowly, reverently, and wrapped his large hand around Lila's wrist, so gently it could have been a prayer. His thumb brushed the little anchor once, twice, as if checking it might vanish. Lila's pulse thundered against his fingers. He looked up at her and his eyes were wet. "What was her name?" he asked, voice cracking on every syllable. "Camila," Lila whispered. "Camila Morales. She died 8 months ago." The sound that left Alexander's throat wasn't human. It was the noise a man makes when the last door he thought was nailed shut suddenly swings open onto a room full of ghosts. He released her wrist like it burned and pressed both palms to his face, shoulders shaking. Lila didn't know what to do. Customers didn't fall apart in her section. They complained about cold eggs. She glanced around. No manager, no other tables, just the rain and the low hum of the neon open sign flickering like it too was about to give up. She slid into the booth opposite him without thinking. "Sir, are you okay?" He laughed, then a raw, wounded sound that turned into a sob he tried and failed to swallow. "No one's called me sir in a very long time," he managed. "My name is Alexander." "Alexander." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. He dropped his hands. His face was a ruin, expensive, famous, and utterly destroyed. "Camila Morales," he repeated, tasting every letter like communion wine. "From Santurce, Puerto Rico." She used to sing Celia Cruz in the shower so loud the neighbors complained. She put lime on everything. She promised she'd wait. Lila felt the floor tilt again. "How do you know that?" she breathed. Alexander looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time Lila saw the boy he must have been at 19, barefoot on a beach, in love with a girl who drew compasses on napkins and said the world was too big for just one lifetime. "Because I'm the idiot who filled in north," he said. "And then I sailed away anyway." Silence swallowed the diner whole. Outside, a taxi splashed past, horn blaring at nothing. Lila's mind raced through every story her mother had never quite told. The American boy with storm-colored eyes who taught her how to say, "I love you" in English. The yacht that disappeared one morning in 2001. The letters that stopped coming. The nights Camila sat on the fire escape staring at the Hudson like it might give him back. All this time the ghost had a name. And he was sitting in booth 7, crying into his cold coffee. Lila reached out without deciding to and covered his trembling hand with hers. Alexander turned his palm up immediately, latching on like a drowning man. Neither of them noticed when Raoul quietly flipped the sign to closed and locked the front door. They had 24 years to untangle, and the rest of the night suddenly didn't feel long enough. The diner lights dimmed themselves the way old places do when they sense something sacred is happening. Alexander's hand was still wrapped around Lila's, as if letting go would make the last 24 years real again. The coffee had stopped spreading. It had reached the edge of the table and now dripped in slow, deliberate tears onto the floor. Neither of them moved to stop it. Lila spoke first, so quietly he felt it more than heard it. "She kept every letter you sent. The ones that came back marked return to sender too. She used to read them to me when I couldn't sleep. Said your words tasted like salt." Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them again they were glassy and ancient. "I wrote for 3 years," he said. "Every port. Every country. I sent money when I finally had it. None of it reached her. My father, he made sure of that. He didn't explain who his father was. He didn't need to. The world knew the late Reginald Quinn had built empires by breaking people first." Lila's thumb moved across the back of his hand, a small, unconscious circle. The same circle her mother used to draw on her back during thunderstorms. She never blamed you, Lila whispered. She blamed the ocean. Said it was bigger than promises. Alexander let out a breath that trembled at the edges. I was 19. Stupid. Thought if I came back rich enough, it would fix what I broke when I left. I built everything on that lie. Every company, every zero in the bank account, it was all supposed to be the apology I never got to say out loud. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw Camila in the curve of her mouth, in the way her left eyebrow arched when she was trying not to cry. You have her hands, he said, voice cracking open. The way your fingers taper. She used to hold seashells like they were made of glass. Lila's tears finally spilled. She didn't wipe them away. She taught me how to crack conch the Puerto Rican way. Said you showed her on a beach in La Perla the night you got the tattoos. Alexander's shoulders folded forward. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob. It was supposed to be temporary, he said. Henna first. Then she dared me. Said if I was man enough to leave, I was man enough to wear her forever. So we found a guy with a guitar string in India ink behind a bar that smelled like piss and platanos. Hurt like hell. Best night of my life. He turned his forearm toward the light. The crooked end looked suddenly young again. I filled in north the day I boarded the yacht, he continued, voice raw. Told myself it was romantic. A promise I'd come back from wherever the wind took me. I was gone before the ink scabbed over. Lila's grip tightened. She waited on that same beach every Sunday for 2 years, she said. Wore white so you'd see her from the water. People called her La Loca del Muelle. She didn't care. Alexander dropped his head into his free hand. I didn't know she was pregnant, he said into his palm. If I had. You would have stayed, Lila finished for him, soft but certain. And you would have hated her for it. She knew that. He looked up sharply. She told you that? She told me everything except your name. Said some ghosts deserve their privacy. Silence stretched between them, thick and trembling. Then Lila did something that broke the last piece of him. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, creased photograph, edges soft from years of being touched. She slid it across the wet table. Alexander picked it up with shaking fingers. It was Camila at 22, standing on that same pier in La Perla, sunburned and laughing, one hand resting on the smallest curve of a belly just beginning to show. In the other hand she held a tiny pair of knit booties the color of the sea at dawn. On the back in faded blue ink. Para mi capitán. Te esperamos. Sí. Alexander made a sound like the world ending. He pressed the photograph to his chest, right over his heart, and cried the way men cry when they realize money can buy silence but never absolution. Lila watched him, tears sliding down her own cheeks, and felt something inside her chest crack wide open. She had spent 8 months being angry at a mother who left too soon, angry at a father who was only a shadow on a wall. Now the shadow was flesh and blood and devastation across from her, and all she felt was the terrifying, ferocious pull of family finding itself again. Alexander lifted his head. His expensive, famous face was swollen and tear-streaked and more human than any magazine had ever captured. Lila, he said, using her name for the first time like a prayer. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what I should have been. But I'm here now. And I'm not sailing away again. The rain outside slowed to a whisper. Lila looked at the man who was her father in every way that mattered and had never been her father at all. She nodded once. Outside, the neon open sign finally gave up and went dark. But inside booth 7, 2 broken hearts had just started beating in the same direction for the first time in 29 years. The first crack appeared at 4:42 a.m., right when the sky outside started turning the color of weak tea. Alexander's phone, face down on the table, began to vibrate like an angry hornet. The screen lit up with the name Marshall Security, in bold white letters. He silenced it without looking. 30 seconds later it started again. Then again. Lila noticed the way his shoulders stiffened, the way the man who had just cried like a child suddenly rebuilt every wall he'd let crumble. I should go, he said, voice flat, already reaching for the coat he'd never really taken off. The words hit Lila like cold water. Go. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. You show up after 29 years, fall apart in my diner, and now you're just leaving? Alexander wouldn't meet her eyes. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his ruined shirt, smearing tears and mascara he hadn't realized he was wearing from some charity gala he'd fled hours ago. It's not that simple, he muttered. There are people who what? Track your location? Protect your brand. She stood up so fast the booth creaked. Do they know you have a daughter who grew up on food stamps because her mother cleaned hotel rooms with bleach that burned her hands? The words were knives and she hated herself for throwing them, but the terror was louder than the guilt. Alexander flinched as if she'd slapped him. I can fix that, he said quickly. All of it. Money, schools, doctors. I don't want your money. The shout echoed off the empty counters. Raoul poked his head out, saw her face and vanished again. Lila lowered her voice but it shook harder. I want the man who wrote those letters. The one who promised to come back when the compass pointed home. Where is he, Alexander? Because the guy in the customs suit looks a lot like the coward who left. His jaw clenched so tight she saw the muscle jump. You don't know what I've carried, he said through his teeth. I know what I carried. She yanked open the tiny locker behind the register and pulled out the battered tin box she kept there. The one with the returned letters, the hospital bills, the photo of her 8th grade graduation where the empty chair beside her mother had its own shadow. She slammed it on the table between them. Open it, she ordered. Alexander stared at the box like it might bite him. I said open it. Slowly he lifted the lid. Inside, dozens of envelopes addressed in his own young handwriting, every one slashed open and stamped return to sender in red. A stack of overdue notices. A single baby shoe bronzed by time and grief. And on top, a yellowed note in Camila's handwriting. If you ever find this Mija, tell him I tried to hate him. I never could. Loaf, mama. Alexander's hands shook so badly the envelopes rattled. Lila watched him, arms wrapped around herself like armor. I grew up thinking you were dead, she said quietly. Dead would have been kinder. Dead doesn't get to walk in here at 3 a.m. and decide when the story ends. He closed the box gently as if it were the most fragile thing he'd ever touched. I'm not trying to end anything, he said. I'm trying to survive the beginning. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered, turning away. Tell them I'm alive, he snapped into it. And tell the pilot to stand down. I'm not flying anywhere tonight. He ended the call and looked back at her. But the moment had calcified. Lila stepped back, putting the counter between them like a border. I think you should go, she said. Lila. I have tables to wipe down. Shift ends at 7. Some of us still have to work for a living. The sarcasm tasted like rust in her mouth, but she needed it to keep from begging him to stay. Alexander stood slowly, towering over the tiny diner, looking suddenly, impossibly small. I'll be back when you're off, he said. Don't make promises you can't keep. You're really good at breaking those. He opened his mouth, closed it, then reached into his coat and pulled out a simple white card, thick stock, no logo, just a phone number written in black ink. This is mine. Not the office. Not the assistant. Me. Any hour. Any day. He set it on the counter like an offering. Lila didn't touch it. Alexander walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. I know I don't deserve for you to believe me, he said to the glass. But I'm not 19 anymore. And I'm done running from north. Then he stepped out into the gray morning, leaving wet footprints that looked like arrows pointing away. Lila stood there until the prints faded. Only when the door chimed shut did she let herself slide down the cabinets to the floor, hugging her knees, crying so hard her ribs hurt. Raoul came out, draped a clean apron over her shoulders like a blanket. You want me to throw that card away, Mija? He asked softly. She stared at the white rectangle on the counter, glowing under the fluorescent light like a tiny lighthouse. No, she whispered. But don't let me call it either. Outside, Alexander stood on the sidewalk in the rain that had started again, staring at the diner's windows until the glass fogged with his breath. He told himself he'd wait until 7. He told himself a lot of things that morning. None of them were strong enough to make him walk away for a second time. But for the next 2 hours they stayed on opposite sides of the glass. He in the storm, she behind the counter. Both pretending the space between them wasn't already tearing them apart. At 6:58 a.m. the sky cracked open. Not metaphorically. An honest-to-God November thunderstorm slammed into Manhattan like it had a personal grudge. The wind howled, street signs rattled, and within minutes the intersection outside the Starlight Diner turned into a shallow, furious river. Lila was counting tips, $23 and a subway token, when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. The ancient generator coughed but never caught. Total darkness swallowed the diner except for the weak emergency strip above the door. Raoul swore in Spanish, kicked the fuse box, and announced he was walking the 6 blocks to his cousin's bodega for candles before the milk spoiled. He was gone before Lila could stop him. She stood alone in the black, heartbeat loud in her ears, the white card with Alexander's number still burning a hole in her apron pocket. Then the door chimed. She knew it was him before the street light caught his silhouette. Soaked for the second time that night, coat plastered to his shoulders, hair dripping into his eyes. He looked like a man who'd been standing outside arguing with God and lost. "I wasn't leaving," he said immediately, voice rough from cold and shouting over the wind. "I couldn't." Lightning flashed. For one white-hot second the diner lit up and she saw the raw plea on his face. Thunder answered a heartbeat later, so loud the windows shook. The power wasn't coming back anytime soon. Every sane business on the block had already flipped their signs to closed. But the Starlight's doors didn't lock from the inside, never had, and now the storm had locked them both in. Lila exhaled shakily. "Looks like the universe has opinions." Alexander stepped farther in, water pooling at his feet. "I'll stay by the door. I couldn't leave you here in the dark." Something in her chest twisted, anger, fear, and a helpless warmth she didn't want to name. "There's a booth in the back that doesn't wobble," she heard herself say. "Sit before you catch pneumonia and I have to explain a dead billionaire to the coroner." He almost smiled. Almost. They moved through the darkness like two people afraid of touching anything that might explode. She found the emergency candles behind the counter, lit 3 with the grill lighter, and suddenly the diner glowed soft and gold, shadows dancing across cracked tile and old photographs taped to the wall. Alexander slid into the back corner booth. Lila took the opposite bench, leaving the candle between them like a tiny referee. For a long minute the only sounds were rain punishing the roof and their breathing. Then he spoke, low and careful. "I used to sit in blackouts like this with your mother. San Juan, summer of 2001. The power grid went out for days. We'd light one candle, share one warm Presidente beer, and pretend the whole world had stopped just for us." Lila's throat ached. She kept that habit. Every thunderstorm she'd kill the lights on purpose. Said it made the saints listen better. Alexander's eyes closed briefly. "I want to hear everything. Every year I missed. Every birthday, every fight, every time you needed me and I wasn't there. But I'm terrified if I push you'll vanish like she did." "I'm not the one who vanishes," Lila said, softer than she meant to. He flinched anyway. She sighed, rubbed her temples. "I don't know how to do this either. I spent my whole life hating a ghost. Now the ghost has a cold and needs a towel." That earned the ghost's first real laugh, small, rusty, but genuine. Lila stood, disappeared into the kitchen, came back with 2 clean dish towels and the ancient percolator Raoul kept for emergencies. She filled it with bottled water, set it on the still warm grill, and soon the smell of fresh coffee rose between them like a peace offering. Alexander dried his face, then his hair, watching her move with the kind of reverence people reserve for miracles they don't deserve. When she slid back across from him, he reached into his inside pocket and carefully laid something on the table. A photograph. The twin of the one she'd shown him earlier, but this one was from the opposite angle. Camila laughing, wind in her hair, holding the booties up to the camera. On the back in younger, happier ink, "Para mi capitán. Volveré a ti." Lila stared at it until her eyes burned. "You kept it," she whispered. "All this time. It was the only thing I took when I left the yacht for good. Been in my wallet every day since I was 23. The candle between them flickered, throwing gold across both their faces. Lila's voice cracked. "Why didn't you come find us?" "I did," he said, and the shame in it was unbearable. Dozens of times. Private investigators, satellite photos, bribes to immigration officials. Every trail ended in 2009. Someone told me Camila Morales died in a car accident in New Jersey. Showed me a death certificate. I believed it because it was easier than believing she stopped waiting. Lila felt the floor tilt again. "She changed our names after the letters stopped," she said slowly. "Took her maiden name back, gave it to me. Said some stories needed new endings." Alexander's head fell forward. "I looked for the wrong woman for 15 years. Silence wrapped around them, softer now, less jagged. Outside, the storm kept raging, sealing the world away. Inside, 2 strangers who shared blood and 29 years of wreckage sat 3 feet apart and realized fate had given them the one thing neither had the courage to take: time. Lila pushed one of the candles closer to him. "Drink your coffee, Captain," she said, voice trembling but steady. "We're stuck here till the streets drain. Might as well start at the beginning." Alexander wrapped both hands around the warm mug like it was the only solid thing left in his universe. "Wherever you want," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time since she was 7 years old, Lila believed a man when he said it. The storm settled into a steady, mournful drum on the roof. The candles had burned low enough that their faces floated in pools of gold and shadow, like two confessors in an old painting. Lila pulled the tin box from beneath the counter and set it between them again. This time she opened it herself. She took out the top item, a tiny hospital bracelet yellowed with age, the plastic cracked. Morales, baby girl. September 14, 1996. Alexander stared at it like it was the original sin. I came 2 weeks early, Lila said, voice quiet but steady. Mama walked 6 blocks through a hurricane to get to the hospital because the ambulance never showed. She told me the thunder sounded like you knocking on the sky trying to get back in time. Alexander's hand hovered over the bracelet, afraid to touch. I should have been there, he whispered. You weren't. Lila's voice didn't accuse this time. It simply stated the fact, the way you state that the sun rises or that people die. But she named me Lila Camila, after the flower and after herself. Said every time someone said my name it would be like you were saying hers. She set the bracelet down and pulled out a stack of letters tied with a faded red ribbon, the ones that had actually reached Puerto Rico before the trail went cold. Alexander recognized his own handwriting immediately. The ink had bled in places from humidity and tears. She read these to me when I had nightmares, Lila continued. I didn't understand half the words, but I knew the sound of you missing us. When I was 8 I asked why you stopped writing. She said the ocean got too loud and swallowed the words. Alexander's eyes filled again. My father intercepted the rest. Threatened to ruin her life if I didn't cut contact completely. I was 22, broke and terrified he'd hurt her. So I disappeared. Built everything he wanted just to keep her safe from him. By the time he died, the trail was ice. Lila nodded slowly, absorbing it the way you absorb a punch you always knew was coming. She reached deeper into the box and pulled out something that made Alexander's breath stop entirely. A single ultrasound photo, grainy and folded in half so many times the creases had turned white. 12 weeks. A tiny bean-shaped shadow with a fluttering heartbeat. On the back in Camila's looping script. Tu hija tiene tu nariz ya, capitán. Date prisa. Alexander made a broken sound and pressed the photo to his lips. Lila watched him, tears sliding silently down her own cheeks. She kept it in her wallet until the day she died, she said. Even after she stopped talking about you out loud, she never stopped carrying you. Alexander couldn't speak. He simply turned the photo over and over in his trembling hands like he was trying to memorize a language he'd forgotten. Lila took a shaky breath and pulled out the last item, a small velvet pouch. She loosened the drawstring and let the contents slide onto the table. A thin gold chain with a tiny gold compass charm, no bigger than a dime. The glass face was cracked, the needle spun uselessly. Mama wore this every single day, Lila said. Even when the clasp broke she safety pinned it to her bra. Said it was the only thing that still pointed to you. Alexander picked it up with reverent fingers. The candlelight caught the crack in the glass and fractured into 1,000 tiny rainbows. She bought it with the first money I ever sent, he said hoarsely. Before my father found out. I was in Athens working on a fishing boat for cash. Mailed it with a note that said, so you always know which way I'm running back. He opened the tiny clasp with shaking fingers and fastened it around Lila's neck. The broken compass settled just above her heart. It was always meant for you, he said. I just took the long way delivering it. Lila's hand closed over the charm, feeling the cracked glass bite gently into her palm. For a moment they simply breathed together, the weight of 29 years pressing down and somehow lifting at the same time. Then Lila asked the question she'd never dared ask her mother. Did she ever love anyone else? Alexander's smile was small and infinitely sad. She dated. Good men. Men who stayed. But every time it got serious she'd touch the compass and say the needle only moved for one person. Eventually they all left. Not because she was cruel, because she was already taken. Lila closed her eyes. The candle nearest them guttered, throwing long shadows. I hated her for that sometimes, she admitted into the dimness. Hated that she kept a place at the table for a ghost. But I think I understand now. Alexander reached across the table and covered her hand with both of his, large, warm, calloused in places she didn't expect. I'm not a ghost anymore, he said fiercely. I'm here. And I'm learning how to stay. Lila looked at him then really looked and saw the cracks in his armor that matched her own. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. Inside, the past had finally been spoken aloud and for the first time in decades the compass, broken, cracked, useless, pointed exactly where it was meant to. The storm had worn itself out. The city outside was quiet now, the kind of quiet that only comes after violence. Water dripped steadily from the gutters, counting the seconds like a slow heartbeat. Inside the Starlight Diner, the candles had burned down to stubs, but neither of them moved to replace them. The low gold light made everything feel suspended, like the world had agreed to pause just this once. Lila rested her elbows on the table, chin in her hands, watching Alexander peel an orange he'd found in the fruit bowl Raoul kept for show. His big hands moved with surprising gentleness, separating the segments one by one. "She used to do this," he said, not looking up. "Peel an orange in one long spiral. Said it was proof magic existed if you believed hard enough." Lila smiled, small and real. "She taught me. I still can't do it without breaking the chain." Alexander glanced up, eyes soft. "Show me." She took the next orange, focused, tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she concentrated. The peel came off in clumsy chunks. He laughed, quiet, warm, the sound of a man who hadn't laughed in years. "Close enough," he said, and handed her a perfect segment. They ate in silence for a moment, the citrus bright and sharp between them. Lila licked juice from her thumb. "When I was 10, I asked her what your voice sounded like. She closed her eyes and said, like the moment before the wave hits, deep, warm, and a little dangerous. I thought she was making it up. She wasn't." Alexander's eyes glistened. He cleared his throat. "I used to fall asleep on cargo ships listening to the engines," he said. "I'd pretend it was you breathing next to me, a baby I'd never met. I'd count the revolutions like lullabies." Lila felt her chest cave in, but gently this time. He pushed the plate of orange segments toward her like a peace offering. "Tell me something good," he said. "Something that wasn't pain." Lila thought for a second, then smiled. "Sixth grade science fair. I built a volcano that actually erupted purple lava. Mama stayed up 3 nights sewing me a lab coat from an old bedsheet. She embroidered Dr. Morales on the pocket with dental floss because we didn't have thread. I won first place." She cried harder than I did. Alexander's grin was sudden and boyish. "I would have given my entire fortune to see that." "You can see the photos," she said shyly. "I have them. Somewhere." "I want all of it," he said. "Every school play, every scraped knee, every time you laughed so hard you snorted. I want the director's cut of your life, Lila." She believed him. He reached across the table and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so careful it broke her heart all over again. "I used to dream about you," she admitted into the quiet. "Not the ghost dad. The real one. I'd imagine you showing up at graduation in a ridiculous hat, cheering too loud. Or teaching me to drive in some fancy car I'd be terrified to scratch. Stupid kid stuff." "It's not stupid," he said fiercely. "And I'm here now. I'll cheer too loud at anything you want. I'll teach you to drive, God help us both. I'll make up for every second I can." Lila looked at him, then really looked, and saw the exhaustion under his eyes, the new lines that hadn't been there in magazines 5 years ago. "You look tired," she said softly. He huffed a laugh. "I haven't slept more than 3 hours a night since 2001. She stood up, came around the table, and without asking slid into the booth beside him. Close enough that their shoulders touched. Alexander went very still. Lila rested her head, hesitant at first, against his upper arm. He was warm, solid, real. After a moment, his arm came around her like he'd been waiting his entire life to do exactly that. They sat like that, father and daughter, breathing in the smell of coffee and orange peel and candle smoke. "I was so scared you'd be disappointed," she whispered against his sleeve. "In you?" He sounded horrified. "Lila, you're miraculous. You grew up kind and strong and funny with every reason not to be. I'm the disappointment." She shook her head against him. "Not anymore." His cheek came to rest on top of her hair. Minutes passed, or hours. Time had stopped mattering. He spoke into her hair, voice rough with wonder. "I used to think success would fill the hole. Islands, companies, headlines. None of it touched the edges. But this booth, this terrible coffee, you leaning on me like I'm allowed to be your dad. This is the richest I've ever been." Lila's tears soaked into his shirt, but she was smiling. Outside, the first hint of real dawn crept through the windows, pale rose and gold. Inside, the broken compass around her neck caught the light and threw tiny fractured rainbows across the table. Lila lifted her head just enough to see his face. "Hey, Captain," she said, voice thick. "Yeah," he answered, eyes shining. "I think North just moved." Alexander laughed through his tears and pulled her closer. For the first time in 29 years, the compass wasn't broken anymore. It was finally perfectly home. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when the front door exploded open with a violence that made every candle flame bow. 4 men in black tactical jackets stormed in, red dots of laser sights dancing across the walls like angry fireflies. Behind them, 2 more in suits, lawyers or handlers, impossible to tell, flanked a woman Lila had never seen but recognized instantly from 1,000 magazine covers. Victoria Quinn. Alexander's wife of 12 years. Ice blonde, immaculate even at dawn, eyes the color of a closing gate. Alexander shot to his feet so fast the booth screeched backward. His arms stayed protectively in front of Lila for half a second before training took over and he stepped forward, hands raised. "Stand down," he barked at the security team. "Now." Victoria didn't blink. "Alexander, the jet is idling at Teterboro. You have exactly 60 seconds to walk out under your own power before these men carry you." Lila's heart slammed against her ribs. She had never felt danger like this, quiet, expensive and absolute. Alexander's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "You brought armed security into a diner to threaten me in front of my daughter?" Victoria's gaze flicked to Lila for the first time. The appraisal was clinical, dismissive, and devastating. "Daughter?" she repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. "Is that what she told you?" She reached into a Hermes bag and produced a thin manila folder. Tossed it onto the nearest table. Photographs spilled out. Lila at 16 sneaking a cigarette behind the high school. Lila at 21, drunk outside a Brooklyn bar, middle finger to the camera. Lila last year cashing a welfare check at a bodega. Then the worst one, a grainy still of Camila, young and laughing, arm around a man who was definitely not Alexander. Date stamp, 1997. A full year after Alexander had supposedly vanished. Victoria's smile was small and sharp. "Your little waitress has been shopping this story for months," she said. Page 6, Daily Mail, even a Netflix producer. "Billionaire's secret love child, very catchy. She just needed you desperate enough to bite." The air left Lila's lungs in a soundless rush. Alexander turned slowly. The warmth in his eyes had frozen solid. "Lila," he said barely above a whisper. "Tell me she's lying." Lila shook her head, frantic. I would never." But her voice cracked on the lie she hadn't even known she was living. Because 3 months ago, drowning in medical debt after her mother's death, a man had slid into her booth with a business card and a promise. 1 authenticated DNA test, 1 quiet meeting, and they'd pay her $500,000 just for the option to tell the story later. She'd thrown the card away. She thought that was the end of it. She had no idea they'd kept digging. Victoria stepped closer, heels clicking like gunshots. "Camila Morales was never faithful, Alexander. She played you the way she played every man with a wallet. This girl is the final invoice." Alexander's face went white beneath the stubble. He looked at the ultrasound photo still clutched in his hand, the one he'd kissed like scripture hours ago, and something inside him shattered so loudly Lila heard it. "Get out," he said to Victoria, voice hollow. "Take your dogs and get out." Victoria arched one perfect brow. "Gladly. But you're coming with me. The board meets in 4 hours. If you miss it, the vote of no confidence passes and you lose everything your father died protecting you from." Alexander laughed once, bitter, broken. "I already lost everything." He looked at Lila then, and the betrayal in his eyes was worse than any scream. "I believed you," he said. "I let myself believe I finally got to come home." Lila reached for him, tears streaming. "Alexander, please. Don't." The single word cracked like ice. "Don't say my name. You don't get to say it anymore." He dropped the ultrasound photo onto the pile of oranges and coffee cups. It landed face down, Camila's handwriting bleeding into the table. Then he walked past Victoria, past the armed men, past the wreckage of the only real morning he'd had in 29 years. Victoria paused at the door, looked back at Lila with something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so satisfied. "Next time you sell a fairy tale, sweetheart, make sure the princess isn't a whore's daughter." The door slammed. Silence fell like a guillotine. Lila stood alone among the ruined candles and scattered photographs, the broken compass around her neck suddenly heavier than any chain. She sank to the floor, knees hitting cracked tile, and screamed, a raw, animal sound that tore her throat and didn't fix anything. Outside, tires screeched. The convoy disappeared into the city that had always eaten dreamers alive. Inside, the Starlight Diner had never felt darker. The city woke up around them, indifferent and loud. Lila hadn't moved from the floor. The photographs lay scattered like crime scene evidence. The candle stubs had drowned in their own wax. Her phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers, reporters probably, but she couldn't find the strength to silence it. Across town, Alexander sat alone in the back of a black Suburban, staring at nothing. Victoria's victory speech droned beside him, something about damage control and NDAs, but the words slid off him like rain. His hand kept going to the place in his coat where the ultrasound photo used to live. Empty now. Everything empty. He closed his eyes and saw Lila's face the moment he called her a lie. He had never hated himself more. At 8:12 a.m., Lila finally stood on legs that didn't feel like hers. She swept every photograph into the tin box, slammed the lid and shoved it into the deepest cabinet. Then she wrote a note to Raoul on an order pad. Family emergency. I might not come back. I'm sorry. She left her apron folded on the counter like a surrender flag and walked out into the cold morning still wearing the broken compass necklace. She didn't know where she was going until the subway took her to the only place that had ever felt like home, the Hudson River Pier at 158th Street, where her mother used to bring her to watch the boats and pretend one of them carried a man with storm-colored eyes. She sat on the same bench, knees to chest, and let the wind slap her awake. At 9:47 a.m., Alexander walked out of the boardroom mid-sentence. Left the vote of no confidence on the table. Left Victoria screaming his name down a marble hallway. Left 38 years of armor in a heap. He went to the one place he had never allowed himself to visit in all the years of searching. The tiny cemetery in Queens where the private investigators had once told him Camila Morales was buried. He found the stone by accident, because the name on it wasn't Morales anymore. Camila Rivera. Beloved mother. 1969 to 2024. Ella esperó al mar y el mar finalmente vino. She waited for the sea and the sea finally came. Fresh flowers, lilacs, lay at the base no more than a week old. Alexander fell to his knees in the damp grass. He didn't pray. He just spoke raw and ragged to the ground. I'm sorry, Cammy. I'm so sorry I got it wrong again. I let them make me doubt her. I let them make me leave her the same way I left you. But I'm done letting other people write the ending. He pulled out his phone, opened the tracking app he hadn't touched since the night he walked into the diner. The one that still had the white card's number stored as North. He stared at it for a long time. Then he dialed. Lila's phone rang in her pocket. A known number. She almost ignored it until some broken, stubborn thing inside her, made her answer. Don't hang up, Alexander said before she could speak. His voice was wrecked. Please. Silence stretched across the line. I'm at your mother's grave, he continued, softer. She didn't change her name to hide from me. She changed it to protect you from my father. From everything I became. The investigator lied. Victoria paid him to lie. I just found the paper trail 10 minutes ago. Lila closed her eyes. The wind off the river tasted like salt and second chances. I didn't sell anything, she whispered. I threw their card away. I swear on her grave. I know, he said. I know you now. I know your heart because it's hers. And I was cruel because I was terrified of losing you the way I lost her. A sob tore out of Lila before she could stop it. I thought you looked at me and saw a fraud, she said. I thought the first time you held me would be the last. Alexander's voice cracked wide open. You are the only real thing I have ever had. And I walked away again. I'm begging you, Lila, tell me it's not too late to come back. She looked out at the gray river, at the gulls wheeling and screaming like they were cheering. Where are you? She asked. Queens, he said. But I'll be wherever you are in 20 minutes. Tell me where home is today. Lila stood up, wiped her face with the sleeve of the same blue dress she'd worn for 2 shifts straight. The pier at 158th, she said. The one Mama used to bring me to. She always said if you ever came back, this is where you'd find us. Alexander was already running. I'm on my way, he said. Don't move. Don't disappear. I'm coming, baby. I'm finally coming home. Lila hung up and pressed the phone to her chest, right over the broken compass that suddenly felt warm against her skin. She looked north, up the river, and for the first time in her life she wasn't waiting alone. The wind off the Hudson had teeth, but Lila didn't feel it anymore. She stood at the far end of the pier, exactly where her mother used to stand. White dress on Sundays, hair whipping like a flag, eyes fixed on the place where river met sky. Today Lila wore the same faded blue uniform dress, hem muddy, sleeves pushed high, the little broken compass glinting gold against her collarbones. Behind her, tires screamed on wet asphalt. A black town car skidded to a stop at the gate, door opening before the driver could shift into park. Alexander ran. No coat, no security, no armor. Just a man in a ruined white shirt and yesterday's grief, running like the 19-year-old who once promised a girl on a beach he would never be late again. Lila turned at the sound of his footsteps hammering the boards. They saw each other across 30 feet of weathered wood and 29 years of wrong turns. And then they were moving. Lila first, one step, then another, then all of her, sprinting toward him, shoes slapping the pier like gunshots. Alexander opened his arms and she crashed into them so hard the impact lifted her off the ground. He caught her, held her, crushed her to his chest like he could fuse the lost years back together with sheer force. Lila's arms locked around his neck, legs dangling, face buried in his shoulder. She was crying so hard she couldn't breathe, but she didn't care. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair, over and over, the words shaking loose from his chest like stones finally rolling off a grave. I'm sorry, I'm here, I'm here." Lila pulled back just far enough to grab his face with both hands. "Look at me," she ordered, voice raw. "Look at me and say it right." Alexander's storm-colored eyes were red-rimmed and shining. "I love you," he said, clear and steady despite the tears. "You are my daughter. You have always been my daughter. And I will never walk away again, not for money, not for fear, not for anything on this earth. I swear on every wave I ever sailed, on every night I spent looking for north. I'm home, Lila. I'm finally home." She searched his face for any flicker of doubt and found none. Then she kissed his cheek, hard and fierce, the way children do when words aren't big enough. "I love you too," she whispered against his skin. "I waited my whole life to say that to your face." Alexander laughed through his tears and spun her once, like she weighed nothing, like joy was weightless after all. When he set her down, they didn't let go. Foreheads pressed together, breathing the same air, hands clutching sleeves and shoulders and wrists like they were afraid the wind might still steal one of them. Eventually the tears slowed. The city kept moving around them, tugs sounding their horns, gulls screaming overhead, but the pier felt like its own small planet. Lila reached for the necklace, unclasped it with trembling fingers, and held the broken compass up between them. "It never worked anyway," she said, half laughing, half crying. Alexander took it gently, turned it over, and with one strong, deliberate twist snapped the cracked glass face completely off. The tiny needle inside spun once, twice, then settled, steady and sure, pointing straight at Lila. He smiled, the first real whole smile she had ever seen on him. "Now it does," he said. He slipped the now open compass into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Keep it," he said. "So you always know exactly where I am." Lila looked down at the little arrow resting against her lifeline and felt something inside her chest click into place like the final piece of a puzzle she'd been carrying since birth. Alexander brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go get breakfast. Real breakfast. Pancakes with faces drawn in whipped cream. The kind you probably never got because your mom was working double shifts to keep the lights on." Lila laughed, a bright, startled sound that turned into another sob and then another laugh. "I want blueberries," she said. "You get the whole damn orchard." They started walking back down the pier, arms wrapped around each other's waists like they were afraid gravity might change its mind. Halfway to the car, Lila stopped. She looked up at him, eyes shining with something new, hope, fierce and unafraid. "Hey, Captain." "Yeah, baby?" She grinned, the same sideways grin from every childhood photo he was determined to memorize. "Welcome home." Alexander pulled her close again, pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and whispered into her hair the words he had carried across every ocean for 29 years. "I never really left." Behind them, the Hudson rolled on, wide and ancient and kind, carrying their story out to sea where it belonged. And for the first time in either of their lives, North was exactly where it was supposed to be. If this story made you cry, laugh, or reach for someone you love, tell me in the comments who you'd wait 29 years for.